back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio Points of View this morning, where we discuss all the important issues that are fascinating people in education in the world today. And today we are discussing the somewhat unexpected or unanticipated proposal that the government floated this week that would reform the way that suspensions work. So for anybody that's not heard about the proposal, it is said that the government in the new white paper, which we're expecting this month, will be going out to review on a proposal to change the way that suspensions work, so that instead of a default position where all suspensions are out of school, some of those suspensions would be still in school. The student would remain in school and be supervised in some separate area by the school staff. It doesn't say that if a child is guilty of a violent incident, that would happen. The suggestion is that there be a difference drawn between when young people have committed an act of violence or harm, physical harm, and then it would be still an external suspension. But for other offences, that the internal approach should be taken. So that's the issue that we're discussing today, and the main teacher unions and lots of other people have already been weighing in with their thoughts on things. So I wanted to ask our panel now who would want to start and what their thoughts are on this proposal.
Well, I'm always happy to start. So I think that one of the biggest issues we have in schools at the moment is behaviour. I think that that is coming up loud and clear across the media. We see so many reports of behaviour-related problems that are causing, at the end of the day, causing those who are there to learn disruption and sometimes fear in the classroom. It's becoming a huge problem. It does need to be dealt with. Like you said, this has sort of come out of the blue somewhat. I can imagine that schools must be in a sort of a state, as are so many different sectors of society at the moment. What do they want? What do they mean? What have we got to provide now? Have I got to find a room? Because whilst in primary schools we're starting to see that drop off in school numbers, that's not yet coming through in secondary schools yet. So they haven't got the space for this. There's no spare capacity. I mean, schools are literally cutting to the bone the amount of teachers that they have. They've cut the amount of teaching support that they have. Who is going to do this? Is there going to be extra money for this? So that's my opening question, I suppose.
And one that many people, I think, have been asking. JP, what's your thought?
Exactly that. I mean, as a current situation that I find myself in, I can see that there are cuts from hard up multi-academy trusts, including my own, cutting behaviour teams and cutting staff members. They want to introduce AI. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Put RoboCop in charge of the kids, you know what I mean? I think Ed 209, you know? Those of a certain vintage would probably think that sci-fi is becoming there. In principle, I can see some merit to what they're talking about. Children going home, it's actually a reward rather than a sanction. You know, they've got their man cave, woman cave, whatever their teenage cave, where they're sent food through a portal under the door and they stay in there the whole time. I mean, I often remarked, people go, how awful it was for kids during COVID. Are you joking? They had food, board, lodgings, and as long as the internet worked, you know, and subscription to Netflix and Tiger King, they were absolutely fine. I mean, that's the thing. I understand that they want to sort of say that suspension needs to be a punishment. Well, I think the punishment would be this. I was suspended from school myself back in the day. I can't go into it too much, but my parents were dragged in. My parents were dragged in. My dad had to take a day off work. And I can tell you, I felt that my suspension was just and I was wronged. Parents felt my suspension was unjust and wronged. But I tell you what, I felt the guilt and the shame of it. And my behaviour was corrected because I brought disrepute from the family. I'd let them down. I'd let the school down. And I was made to feel as if I had done something wrong. And the punishment itself was the loss of respect that I received and the way my parents dealt with it. And that's the elephant in the room. They're not addressing the root causes of behaviour. This is like reforming the prison service. Yeah, well, should we send criminals home? Yeah, let's send criminals home instead of putting them in prison. That'll work, won't it? And I get the concept that we want children not to lose out in their education. But also, there are children in classrooms who are losing out in education because those children who are suspended, before they get to suspension, cause absolute chaos. So what they're not doing is addressing the elephant in the room. And that is a crisis in behaviour, leadership, a crisis in standards. And that's societal, that's the whole shebang. And I think we teachers sometimes are the last guardians. God bless the police officers as well. We're kind of last guardians of any standards, any moral standards. We have terrible leadership in this country time after time who lie, gaslight. The moral compass is just being deviated to such an extent that this just keep them in schools. You think of the amount of time that school has with children, 190 odd days a year, 6 hours a week, and an average teacher sees those children 1 to 2 hours a week. What impact do I have on changing their behaviour that is already set? And that's the question we need to really address, is that we cannot fix society's problems. This is just a sticking plaster over the absolute gaping wound of us picking up the pieces again of societal issues that we just cannot stop. And I'm a parent myself. Before anybody wants to teacher bash me, I'm a parent. They're my children. They're my responsibility. Their behaviour reflects on me. The buck stops with my responsibility as a parent. The school supports me the other way around. I sometimes can question the school's behavioural policies within my rights to do so and engage with the school. But we have not seen enough parents do that. They're quick to criticise and quick to say my child's needs aren't being met. Schools are not baristas. We are not coffee shops. We can't just tailor the needs to your child because your little child gets what they want at home. We need to have an education sector which actually educates people on how to educate children. And Sorry,
I was just going to jump in on that particular point because I think this is the issue, that actually this is micromanagement from the government itself. School behaviour policies are almost irrelevant in this because they won't have any, because they'll be told by the government what they can and can't do. And that is just constantly telling schools, feeding back to them, you don't know what you're doing, we're going to have to work it out for you. That's not the case. Schools know their pupils, they know their areas, they know the demographic so much better than the government does. And to think that they can come in and start, and telling schools and dictating to schools how they should manage behaviour. They should be helping schools to manage behaviour, not dictating to them. So the school policy, the behaviour policy thing, I can see that becoming a null and void.
So do you think perhaps this is a policy that hasn't come from schools, it hasn't come from teachers? There isn't a popular wave of concern about the way that a suspension sanction works. This is something that comes from government. And if it comes from government, then why have they decided, do you think, to make this a priority now rather than, well, you mentioned a number of other things, JP, that are, I would argue, probably much more a concern in your average staff room. So why do you think the government have made this a priority right now?
It's from the usual last couple of years we've seen policy driven by headlines in newspapers rather than actual evidence. If the evidence says that this is a better policy, produce that evidence, let academics work on it, let teachers work on it, come up with a policy that works in reality, and a policy, as Lucy would suggest, that is flexible enough to allow schools at different settings to adjust it to their context. But this is just to generate headlines. Look at us. We're doing something about discipline in schools. Oh, aren't we fantastic? And it reads okay, but when you delve beneath the surface, it's quite patronizing. It is, I think, as Lucy suggests, it's quite patronizing. Same as the phone policy. I filed this under the phone policy of we seem to be doing something what actually schools are already doing. You know, we're going to ban phones in schools. You're 10 years too late on that one, to be perfectly honest with you. But that reads well. It's like we're in control here. It's the illusion of we're in control. We are really on top of this because we are doing this. But the reality is they're not on top of this because they don't want to address the actual real issue. And that is a deep conversation that needs to happen at a societal level, and the government needs to show leadership from the top. And that leadership needs to show and be very clear to parents. The pandering, again, no disrespect, and as a parent myself, this is more about sort of meeting the needs of parents. Because let's think about it. If as I said, those children were sent home, they would have to be their parents' problem. And as we saw during COVID, we're really turning into glorified babysitting service, aren't we? So let's keep the kids in school, even when they do wrong, because that's what they should be. I get that. I do want, and there are times actually I have children in inclusion, and I will pull that child from inclusion into my classroom, say if they're a GCSE pupil, and I want them to do revision. And that's fine. The behaviour team's usually okay with that, because I will say, look, that child needs to be in my class. And there are times there are children suspended. I will go to that child and say, how did you get yourself suspended? I need you in the class. I want you in the class. And I have to then say to the student, you've lost out on the opportunity to be in my class because of your behaviour. And for some children that works. But some hardcore children, it doesn't matter what we're going to do with them. Because the problem is there are deep-seated issues that have not been addressed. And government talking about, here's a classic one. They go home and they've got social media, and they go home and they've got these devices. Again, okay, regulate the social media. They're talking about banning social media. Yeah. Regulate it. If those children have access to devices, then say to yourself, those children shouldn't have access to those devices. Absolutely. But that's a more difficult thing to do, and that doesn't play well with voters and popularity. We have government basically run by popularity contests.
This is right.
Not policy. It's not policy. It's not evidence.
That's exactly it. So to me, they look at headline figures. We need to be able to put on a leaflet 100% of this, 45% reduction in. And that's, I think, how they work out what they want it to look like, and then they work back from that. That's the only way I can think that they would hone in on this and say what they've done is said the figures aren't good. We can say we've reduced those figures, but they haven't actually improved behaviour in schools. They've just passed the buck on to schools to deal with bad behaviour and keep it on the hush, as it were. And that's even worse.
So the optics then, it seems, are the preferred explanation for why this somewhat unexpected priority has been thrown into the limelight. And I would agree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to look at it from their point of view and see what their argument would be, because I suppose they would argue that at the moment too many young people are being suspended, and that too many of them see that as a reward, in that they then can do all the things that JP, you were describing, young people doing in the pandemic, that they can go home, they can game and go on social media to their heart's content, and they don't have to do a great deal in terms of work because expectations are low as far as engagement's concerned on that one. So it's actually a reward for bad behaviour rather than a punishment for bad behaviour. So do you think that's right?
Before we go any further, can I just talk to you, because I wanted to tell you about Hachette Learning, because the show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explore the full range of titles. I say it every time. And then Teachers Talk Connect is back, our annual CPD and networking extravaganza. Join the TTR team on Saturday the 14th of March in Manchester. Tickets are free. What are you waiting for? Head over to ttradio.org/connect 2026. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. My proposition to you was that some people may say, and the government may say, that currently the way that suspensions work is actually a reward for poor behaviour, and that what this would do is raise the punishment level. It would make it more unpleasant to be suspended for poor behaviour. What would you say in response to that?
Well, I mean, I have some sympathy with that, to be fair, because I think that we know that actually some of the behaviour issues that we have are down to children disengaging from school. They don't want to get out of their beds anymore. I don't know whether COVID, I don't know how long we can keep saying COVID is the cause of this. I don't know how long that will be, but it has caused a change in mindset in a lot of people, where they feel as though it's unfair that they have to get up every morning, that they have to make a journey, they have to get dressed into clothes, and and so in some ways, even if we ban social media, which I totally support, and we discussed that last week, but even if we do that, I still think that there are lots of nice things to do at home for kids who didn't want to be in school in the first place. So there is an argument to be made for that, but I don't think the government are providing a solution to that. So they've looked at that, said that's a problem, and that's all. We know that it can be, I don't know whether there's an issue with parents having to take time off if the kids are younger, and therefore the government are saying, well, that's costing. I don't know what the purpose behind it really is. I don't think any of us do. However, I do think it's something that we need to. I have an element of sympathy with that argument. When you have the excluded students turning up on their bikes outside schools, which I've read about, and I remember when I was at school, because I went to quite an interesting school, and we would have those kids, they'd be outside the gates, and we'd all be told, come away from the gates, because they'd be out there and they'd be drinking fizzy drinks and having it. So this isn't even a modern thing necessarily, it's always been a bit of a treat for some who don't care. And obviously, JP, for you, when you were suspended, you were hauled through the coals, and you felt very uncomfortable about it. I was never suspended, even though I was quite a naughty kid at school, but I was never suspended and never had a detention, because I knew the absolute pain that I would go through at home, and the societal attitudes have changed. Everything has changed, and I think that we've got to learn how to deal with some of these changes in the modern world.
I mean, I'd just like to make the important point at this stage that I was extremely well behaved at school. And none of those horrible things. I didn't do any of those at all.
but one of the reasons why is
the reasons why I didn't do anything bad.
Well, I'll give you the reasons why I did. And to anybody listening, going to criticize what I'm going to say, undiagnosed needs.
Well, can I throw in?
I was caned for it at primary school.
Really?
So when I hear these people going, my child's needs aren't being met, I'm going, mine weren't. And a lot of my friends who were dyslexic weren't. And a lot of my behavior could now be explained by. And teachers back then weren't trained as we were. And I'm getting tired of that idea that we are I am as a teacher working 100 times harder than the previous generation of teachers to meet as many needs as possible. Yeah. We just can't keep up. It just can't keep up. And I'm sorry, some of it's used as a shield. Some of it's used as a shield. I myself now, I take responsibility for my actions. And in fact, I feel injustice a lot more than most. They say that's an ADHD trait, because I fall upon my own sword and I've set myself a very high standard. But what I've established as a teacher is routines, consistency, and holding the line. And I've got a lot of respect from parents and pupils over the years. The amount of challenge and pushback I'm getting in the last couple of years is getting higher. To basically, people get what they want. And I think this is one of those sort of, not pandering to parent power, but it is in a way more convenient for parents to have the children in school when they're suspended. And yes, I think it's a sound argument. You're right, Lucy. It is a sound argument, because children can be at home and children can be playing around with this stuff. But then that goes back to the central problem of, I'm sorry, when they're sent home, they're sent home.
There should be parents.
Right, and when I was sent home and suspended, my mother was there, but that was that society at that time when you had the mother at home, and that's the two-parent working household. So I have sympathy for some parents, because they're out working hard and they're out doing their best, and then their child gets sent home, and that causes issues. And I think the grandparents sometimes get pulled in. I found that sometimes talking to the grandparent is better than talking to the parent. In fact, I often rang the grandparent about the child's behavior, knowing that the grandparent is then going to cascade that to the parent, because the grandparent is probably the one with more authority and power, and one you're ringing me about your child, sort your child out. So I've done that on numerous occasions where I rang the grandparent, who I've known quite well, about the parent. And I actually had one situation recently where I rang the grandparent about the child, and I taught the parent. So literally I'd gone back to the original parent and said, what's going on with your grandchild? And it was like, the parent themselves was an ex-pupil of mine saying, "Why did you ring my mum? It's just like the good old days." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is like the good old days." And it worked because you established those relationships. And that's not what's in this as well, is how does that build relationships? Because the key to behavior is about building relationships. And I think schools and parents, there is a gap now between that. And you get the kind of lack of responsibility. It's not my child's fault. I am tired of everybody blaming everything but the very person. The child needs to take responsibility. The parents need to take responsibility. And if the school mess up, the school need to put their hand up. I have numerous occasions if I got it wrong, rang a parent, apologized and said, "I'm really sorry, I overpunished your child there. Is that all right?" And a parent would find that usually most of the time quite fine. But we're getting more now who are out to get us. The gap between us and them is getting wider and wider. And anything schools do now is just amplified. And when people don't get what they want, it's the newspapers, it's the MP, it's my child's not being met. And it's almost as if we're literally the meat between the sandwich. And I think this policy, without talking about it, done behind our back for our own benefit, is patronizing. It's patronizing. Sorry.
What I'm hearing is that your views are, and I wouldn't disagree with them, that this is essentially a populist policy, more concerned with the optics than the reality. And that parental responsibility is being eroded, and responsibility for behaviour is being passed increasingly to schools and away from parents, and that is the wrong way to do things, because I think we'd all agree in schools that we only have a degree of influence over behaviour, because behaviour ultimately does come from the home. It isn't just a question of school and what they are or are not doing. It's a question of an awful lot else that's going on in that young person's life. And consequently, this runs the danger that it will take the spotlight away from parental responsibility and move it towards schools, another potential thing that schools are responsible for. Now, they are responsible for behaviour, but also for then looking after their child when looking after the child of a parent when they've been suspended, and that's something that does I think concern us. What about the question of mobile phones, just for a moment? And I didn't want to spend a moment on this because it's been covered a lot, but there was an argument put forward, I think, by Bridget Phillipson, that one of the problems with the suspension at the moment is that kids will be on their phones, they'll be on their devices. What about if one of the conditions of a suspension was that the school kept the mobile phones and or the child's mobile phones? How would you think that would work?
No, it would be an ECHR thing, wouldn't it? Or a Human Rights Act or something. You couldn't possibly make my child give their phone up. This is my property. They have a right to access. Their granny's ill. There would be 1,000 reasons given why that child would have to have the phone. It's just that would not, I'm afraid it wouldn't work. And actually, I still feel as though those bans on mobile phones in classrooms, I don't know whether it happens, but whether they hand in a dummy phone, an old phone, and still have an accessible phone or a usable phone on them. I just, you can get them. I don't know, they're not cheap, but you can buy secondhand phones. Right. And
I think I know what you're getting at, Cara. I think I know what you're getting at is that, for instance, I've always advocated for the oldest kids in school, and they don't like me for advocating this, that they shouldn't be automatically going to their prom. I'm sorry, for me, the best punishment is the thing they care about the most. And a lot of parents do that. A lot of parents, I joke with kids going, is your parents driving around today with their Xbox in the boot again? So God bless. There are a lot of parents who hide controllers, who hide devices, and there's a game of cat and mouse that goes on in some households. But they know the thing that's most valuable to students is their mobile device. And I get you're absolutely spot on, Carl, because they do. You take away their device from them, and it's like you're removing an external limb, because the music goes through that, the social media goes through that. And I suppose the thing with the exclusion, which would support what they're saying to a certain extent, would be that exclusion then deprives them of the thing that they really want, which is that device, that time. But that's what we do with detentions, don't we? We detain children for a period of time because we take away their free time And that's why detentions don't work, because kids get so much free time now. They don't do chores. When I was a kid growing up, I had 3 or 4 hours of homework and chores to do. Free time was more valuable. Our kids have got so much free time now because everything's done for them. The world's become so fast and quick. You're robbing them of opportunities to do stuff when you actually think of how busy children are. I get that when I say to children, could you do 20 hours a week revision? And they look at me and go like, I can't possibly do that. And I asked a child to show me their mobile phone. Show me your mobile phone. How many hours were yesterday were you on your mobile phone? 4 hours, 5 hours on your mobile phone. That's 5, 7, 35. There's 35 hours mobile phone time. You can squeeze in 20 hours of revision. Oh, I'm busy. And that's the problem, is they are wired in. So yes. I think you're onto something, Cara. I think you've got a point there that's very valid. What's the punishment that would be the most impactful on children is really what you're suggesting, isn't it?
I am. I mean, I think I also need to, I'm trying to think through how to give the government a way of getting out of this in a face-saving way, because I suspect that they didn't anticipate how controversial this would be amongst schools. I know the unions and some big voices in education have been a little bit more measured about their response to it, but everybody I talk to in schools on the ground is generally not in favour of this. And I think the government probably have underestimated that reaction, but they don't want to lose face. They don't want to back down, and they make some legitimate points in the reasons for doing it, even though we think it's principally about optics. So one of the things could be that you address the question of mobile phones by simply saying, well, one of the conditions is that schools actually have greater powers. So they have a legal power to confiscate and hold the child's mobile phones and other electronic devices, and that they be handed over. Now, before, we all completely dismiss the idea as ludicrous, and I know that it probably is ludicrous. But if you imagine a scenario where all schools, as in fact they will be, required to be mobile phone free, and we operate pouches, as many schools are starting to do, then when at the moment the decision is made to suspend a child, the school will either have possession of that pouch in a locker somewhere, or the child will have the pouch, but they would need access to the little clipping thing to unlock the pouch that the school could either deny or provide, at which point it would then be possible, in theory, at least, for that device to hold it. Now, yes, you probably get multiple devices and goodness knows laptops and all sorts of other things in there. So it's probably more a gesture than a reality, but it would help the government to say, look, we're getting tough on the question of access to social media and online gaming and so on, whilst at the same time retaining the authority of schools and keeping parental responsibility as an important part of the system. And I only throw it in there as a thought, and I'm absolutely certain that nobody in government listens to Teachers Talk Radio, much as I would advocate that they do so. Yeah. But I do just chuck it in there.
It was very kind of you to provide them with an off-ramp to a terrible policy idea that's clearly not been tested, that hasn't been in the manifesto, that hasn't been run past enough schools for them to get a feel for how this might go down. It shows that there is that lack of understanding about the strength of feeling in schools amongst teachers and head teachers about how behaviour is ruining education. It's ruining the teaching of education, or teaching subjects, is ruining the learning of subjects for other students. So yes, I think that I don't think it's a ludicrous idea at all. I just can see court cases and, everybody's lawsuited up now. Everyone knows their rights, and I can just see it being a no hooper from the start. It'll be thrown out and it won't be possible. But it would be the perfect idea, because you are absolutely right. I mean, I am not dependent on my phone. I try and leave my phone around, and then I get a phone call from my son and I think, oh, God, sorry, I missed your call, because I'm trying not to take my phone everywhere I go. So I'm trying to break that dependence, or, you know, but for children, it's even worse, because like you said, that is their access to everything at the moment. And actually it's replacing in-person friendships and going out on your bikes and all of those things. So it's a huge problem. It would break that, and it would be something that would really put kids off. And we do need those sanctions, desperately need those sanctions, because it's no longer enough to be scared of what your mum and dad are going to say, because generally your mum and dad are going to back you up as well. That's how it seems these days.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a good idea. I can just see it not being possible to enact it. I think we've got to get to the grassroots of it. I think we have to understand, why is there such a disconnect now with education that has grown? It's not an overnight thing. I don't think it's just because of COVID, although I think COVID exacerbated a lot of problems, but it's been creeping in over a long period of time. And I keep saying, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, we've got to get it right at those younger ages, because that's when that engagement begins to tail off. We've seen behaviour problems in primary schools that you would never have dreamt to see in a secondary school before. And so, you know, that's where the government should be looking at strategies, speaking to schools and understanding what's happening behind the issues, and then coming up with strategies to try and make those problems to improve things, basically, so that we don't even have to do this in the first place, so that suspension becomes an unusual thing again, and we can go back to, you know, a sort of more sensible, rules-based approach where there are boundaries and consequences, because that's what we need.
And that's the point. The suspension was an unusual thing. A suspension was a humiliating thing. A suspension was. And we talked about one of our previous shows about the 19 suspensions in the school in Northern Ireland. Now, where I come from, suspensions are a very unusual thing, because societal pressure is a little bit different, and society over there is a little bit different, and education's values are a little bit different as well. And it's taken me a long time to adjust to that. But there is a disproportionate amount of children who are suspended from certain backgrounds, aren't there? And from economic backgrounds. And what you'd find is that you will have a situation where you'd suspend that child, and imagine, here's a scenario, and I haven't think they thought this one through. So this is where the dots don't join with them. You suspend the child, and then you say, we're going to have the child in an internal exclusion. The parent doesn't agree with the suspension, the child stays off school anyway. There's the flaw. There's the complete flaw in everything they're talking about, because some parents will turn around and say, my child shouldn't be punished. I don't want my child in an internal exclusion. I had a scenario with a parent who is very vociferous, and I get on with them quite well, because I'm always quite honest with them. And I'll give you an example of my honesty. They were talking about the child going to another school because of lateness, and they were a lot late a lot of times, and the small low-level stuff that built up into moving to another school temporarily for one day. So going to another unit. So we have a sanction where you send a child to the school next door, and they send us ours as a kind of internal exclusion. And that kind of works. So you change the setting, and they're completely different systems. They're isolated from their friends, and it's actually quite a reasonably effective way of doing it. The parent was like, my child's losing a day's education, of which my response was, they lost 5 days education when you took them out on a holiday. So it doesn't work that way. Of which they went, well played. That's a good point as well. Now, I had done that with another parent, I'd probably be facing a suspension. But I built a relationship up with that parent, a relationship based on candor and honesty, which was, look, we've got systems in place. Your child is late. He needs to come to school on time. Let's come up with a better system. And you know what? While we're on the subject, you're having to go with us for him losing 1 day's education. You took him out for a family holiday at the start of the term, and he lost 5 days. And she was like, well, it was a good holiday. I said, well, it was. And he learned a lot during it, absolutely fine. But we can't have it both ways. And the same goes for schools as well. We need to build a relationship with parents. And it's all right to sort of condemn and criticize some parents, which I'm perfectly able to do, because that's part of my job. And equally, they can criticize me if they want. But we'll have to find out compromise in the middle ground. And I do think this policy may have some merit in trying to help the disadvantaged students. But again, it doesn't address austerity. It doesn't address the sheer start centre stuff. It doesn't address, again, it's schools trying to fix problems that government structurally needs to fix. We cannot be the magic wand that waves and schools sort the problem out, because we are the fulcrum of everything now. Everything's been piled onto us. So now we want to sort children's behaviour out. We're not the police service. You know, we're not the probation service. We are educators, and we will educate as much as we can. But the bulk of the children, let's be honest, the bulk of the children we teach, does not talk to. The bulk of the parents we're talking about does not talk to. It's always a minority, a vocal minority that we never deal with, because they shout loudly. They use everything in their arsenal to undermine systems. So systems need to be airtight. You know that as educators. Any system that's not airtight, there'll be holes and cracks in it. And there's the first major hole that nobody's connected. We have an attendance crisis from certain pupils. Those pupils are more likely to be the ones suspended. And now you're going to say they're going to have those suspensions in school. Those parents will simply say, I'm not sending my child into school. You'll have a school refuser on your hands, and they'll never serve that sentence.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think there's also a whole question about the reality of, say, for example, a pupil is suspended for 5 days, which happens quite often in schools, and the concept that they would be in a private sealed room in school for 5 solid days, I think begs a question there about whether that's entirely the right way to handle that child, and whether that might have effects on their their mood and their state of well-being, to use a current phrase, which wouldn't necessarily be very positive. So in other words, it would be worse. It would be a form of almost torture or incarceration, whilst getting parents off the hook to a degree. So I think, because that's the reality, that a young person would be in that room, that space, and it would have to be, by its very nature, separate from everywhere else and everybody else. And that is that's a very difficult thing. So what would possibly happen then is schools would be reluctant to do that, and they'd also face more parental pushback, because parents would question whether their child should be put through that process. And as you say, JP, then what might happen is also some parents would say, well, my child is not spending 5 days in that internal suspension unit, so we're going to keep them off school. Now the school could say then, well, you can keep them off school, but when they return, they've got to go to the suspension unit. So one way or another, it's going to happen. But you could very easily see that escalate to a tit for tat, where the parents saying, well, in that case, then I'm not sending my child to school at all. And you could get some long-term absences result from that, which, that's a very real possibility, which I think the government needs to consider in this.
And if anything, what that will lead to more suspensions and more bureaucracy and more hostility. And you have then the broken relationship, the broken social contract between that parental unit and the school. And I've seen that often. And therefore there has to be that discussion, that hard discussion that says these are the rules of the school. And what the government need to do is start backing schools and saying, schools are professionals. I don't tell my dentist how to drill teeth. I don't tell my doctor how to use a stethoscope. I am tired of people second guessing what we do. We are academics. Now I use a mixture of behaviorism mixed with constructivism, mixed with I have to be honest, I'm a bit of an old school Skinner. I myself, I do like behaviorism. And when I did my master's degree in education, I spotted some of the things that I do as a teacher that work for me. And one of the reasons they work for me is because I'm a neurodivergent teacher. I have routines. I've got very strict routines. I've got a very strict way of doing things. I've got ways that actually help me. And the majority of children who are neurodiverse will comment and say, sir, I like the way you do things, because I am strict, but I'm also compassionate. And that's what needs to be adhered to, is that they are children after all. They're allowed to make mistakes. But the problem is, same as adults, if you do not acknowledge that you're making a mistake, you cannot correct the behavior. I never got suspended again afterwards because I didn't want the humiliation of my parents, but I had to reflect. And we even have a room that you call reflection, which I joke about, because the kids don't reflect in reflection. They just go in there and they go, why are you in here? It's not my fault. Everybody else is talking. And you're like, we're not talking about people taking any reflection. But hey, look, when we have people in charge of the country who weren't partying but were partying. We've got members of the royal family who are like taking photographs inappropriately. I'm sorry, but we have to ask a serious question about actual standards and behaviour. And I think the people in education sometimes are guard keepers going, what is going on? Is anybody telling the truth out here? Is anybody? I just feel I'm sounding like a very old school ultra conservative, and I'm not. I'm quite a liberal guy.
No.
But I just feel as if it is harder to be a person who is an educator, who's upholding very high standards, when you constantly look around at you at, parent ringing up and saying my child's sick today, and they're not sick. It's just become the basic standards of people's behaviours. Talking about young people on the buses and talking about young people in manners. There's something societally rotten at the moment, and I can't put my finger on it. And it's lack of pride. Even the uniform. My child's uniform has got nothing to do with their education. Yes, it does. Absolutely. It's about pride. It's about how they look, how they think, how they view themselves. Are they, how their self-esteem is. And you can almost spot it sometimes. Then you wear a uniform with pride. You are proud to be at the school. You are proud of your work, pride of your work. And I think we're losing that. And for me, the Labour government's not grasping the nettle on this. They're trying to sort of do something that looks like doing a policy, but we need a root and branch discussion about the purpose of education, because they think the purpose of education is now changing nappies, brushing kids' teeth, disciplining children, and then we're becoming the surrogate parent. And that's not fair on parents, because then when we do those things, parents then attack us for doing the very things that we're told we need to do. So we're caught between the rock and a hard place. So parents and government need to have this conversation, because we're caught in a civil war between parents and government with their different demands. And we're trying to get the porridge just right, the Goldilocks moment of trying to meet the needs of Ofsted and government and making sure that we're doing our job, while at the same time, sometimes one side of our brain's going, I don't want to follow this policy because it's absolutely nuts and it's not going to work.
Yeah. So we're the moral guardians of values and for young people, and I think that's what we should be. Lucy, you mentioned resources a little bit earlier when you were talking about this. What do you see as the problem as far as resources are concerned with this proposal?
Well, the first problem, I would say, is that it says in the article that they would expect the students to be provided with work that was the work they will be missing out on in the classroom, so that they don't miss any lessons, and there's no need to catch up. They say, like, this is a great thing. Did they realise what work needs to be done? I mean, I remember being, sitting down, quickly checking an email, in the break time. Oh, Harry's not going to be in my lesson today because he's in the internal exclusion room. I've got to provide work. So my break became printing off work for him to do, then writing a little explanation. You find how to do it in the text. These things don't happen readily. You're not going to have an expert in all fields in that room supervising those students. And you're also going to have multiple students in that room. It's not going to be one room per child. They're not going to be held in cells with one adult supervising them one-to-one education. This is going to be a group of kids who are all out for behaviour reasons, and very often they still tend to mess about in those rooms. They're not easy rooms. Anybody who has to do isolation room or reflection room duties or anything will say, oh God, period 3, I'm in the isolation room, and they dread it. They don't want to do it. So these aren't, I think the idea that children will go there and then they will sit there very nicely and they will do their work and they will go, I'm never going to do that again because it was awful, is just for the birds. And so you've got to find teachers, you've got to find the space, you've got to have the work, you would have to just always have an option in your lesson for work to be taken to that room. So that means more planning, because you plan to deliver a lesson to teach how to do something, and if you just throw the work at them and say get on with this, they can't. So the idea always was, we tried all different things at school. We had packs, work packs that you could give so that teachers didn't have to waste their break times and things trying to find works for students to do. But that doesn't work, because then they've missed the lesson. We want children to come to their lessons, to engage with their lessons, to try and do the work that they do. And I was not perfect at this myself as a student, so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it will work perfectly, but that is the aim, and that should be the aim. And the personal responsibility element of it should come. Like me with my GCSEs, I massively underperformed on what I could have done, because I didn't see it as important enough. I've always owned that. As an adult, I've always said, well, that was my choice. That was what I did. So I don't have. And then I made up for it because I joined the Navy. I didn't go to university because I didn't do well enough. And then I had to do a degree while I was bringing up children. And you know, but you do it. You have to take personal responsibility. And that is lacking nowadays. That is something that the government seems to be encouraging abdication of at all levels, at all times. You know, we can fix this for you. It's not your fault. And some of the reason, you know, you said about the society, you know, the attitudes have changed, and I can't remember the term that you used, but you said it's sort of everything's changed, and parenting has changed. I mean, I was in a coffee shop yesterday, and these people had all gone to meet up with their kids. They just let their children run wild. It was like a soft play centre, but it was a coffee shop with hot food and hot drinks being carried around. And you know, there just seems to be a sort of an abdication. I think people, the attitude towards discipline has changed in society, in parenting. It's expected to be changed in schools, but we're still expected to be able to deliver high quality lessons to all students, and all students should meet their expected levels of progress. And that's fine, because that should be the case. But behaviour is what underpins that. And that's what's stopping those targets from being achieved.
And some of the changes are positive. Some societal changes are positive. I mean, people like me are no longer caned. I'm better understood. And that's where I think some arguments fall down. We're not meeting the child's needs. No, we are meeting the child's needs. You just keep changing the goalpost of what the child's needs are. What are the child's needs? Could you please tell me? And then can I meet them? Is it physically possible to meet them? There's such a demand culture and a marketization culture. It's kind of capitalism meets education. You know, you can get what you want. But, you know, I could walk in, as I said, barista style education. I want school to meet my needs my way, that way, because I can order stuff online on Amazon. I can order my education from you. And it's like that service economy. When you don't get what you want, I'll complain. I mean, now the head teacher is becoming like, you know, that old thing when people would walk in and go like, I'm not satisfied with the service. Can I see the manager, please? You know, that kind of, I'm going to get you into trouble. And the poor head teachers these days are fielding questions from parents who are going straight to the head teacher and you're going, talk to me, not the head teacher. If you want, but why are they going straight to the head teacher? I'm getting you into trouble. I'm going to go to the manager because I'm not satisfied with the service. It's that culture of kind of shout loudly, get what you want. It's bullying. It's bullying. We're at a stage now where I went to school, the teachers were the bullies. Now we're being bullied, and neither is right. Don't get me wrong. I had horrible teachers. No disrespect to them. They were hiding behind hiding behind teaching, throwing objects at me, dusters come flying at you. And when you think of it now, I respected them. I was scared of them. And when people say, you know, we've lost that those that advocate bringing back corporal punishment, stuff like that, I don't agree with them. I don't agree with them because I don't think that's not the solution. And stricter is not always better. It is got to do with finding the balance between, and I think we've swung far too much. And I think what you're suggesting, Lucy, we've swung far too much into feral territory. And then when we come into schools and say to kids, sit down, sit still. I mean, sit down and sit still. I'm looking at my year 7s at the moment, and they are literally like, and it's like, they're wired, absolutely wired. It's like something Disney would do, like what do you call it, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? And they're all like Roger Rabbit. I'm like, just sit, work, calm. And they don't have it because their lives are just like, and then all of a sudden we impose structure, school, timings, lessons. Kids don't have that any longer. They basically are micromanaged to a certain extent that their lives are not their responsibility. So when they're late, it's not their fault. They're just default setting is when they're naughty, it's not their fault. And their parents will go, you're not meeting my child's needs, not their fault. Or the schools aren't providing for my child, not their fault. And you go, right, okay. Somewhere in the middle, it may be both. Somewhere in the middle, schools do need to work harder, but we've only got a certain pool of resources. We've got a staffing crisis, a funding crisis.
Can I just pick up on 2 points, JP, there? I mean, the first one, and Lucy, you've suggested similar, is that behaviour and personal responsibility, both from the child and the parent, has deteriorated in the modern world. It would be relatively easy for any of us to go back into the past and find an almost identical speech or statements made by each generation about the young people at that time. So if you could go back to the 1920s, I was only the other day reading something very along these lines, talking about how responsibility has been eroded, parents don't do their job anymore, young people are feral, the world is falling apart. And you could do the same in the late 19th century and so on and so forth. So is this just another repeat of the regular human cycle, natural as it is, that middle-aged people bemoan the behavior of young people, and then at some point those young people become responsible because they grow up, and that actually all we're doing is just repeating history? So that's one question. And the second one is about resources. Lucy, you said about the fact that there couldn't be this suspended student couldn't be in one individual room. But I would contend that the policy wouldn't work if you had lots of young people in a room, like often happens in reflection rooms or removal rooms or whatever you want to call them. Because in practice, imagine you had a fight in school and two children were suspended because you took the view that both of them were responsible for, being violent. And then they would be both suspended and then both put in the same room together, sat side by side with one another for 2 or 3 days. Now, I mean, I'm a very experienced teacher, but I wouldn't fancy that gig. I wouldn't fancy having to manage that situation. In practice, those young people who were suspended would need to be in separate rooms, I think, most of the time. And if that wasn't the case, then you'd have chaos in school. And as you say, Lucy, it would be very difficult to manage those young people. So there are really big resource implications because an awful lot of schools do not have those facilities. So they do not have a plethora of separate rooms. And if you have separate rooms, you probably need separate supervision, or at the very least, you need a way of making those young people visible to the supervisor. And that means extra salary costs because you've got to employ somebody to do that, and somebody that's skilled enough to do that. It's not an easy job. It's not just somebody, it's not being like exam invigilation. You've got to be really skilled in managing young people with complex needs and very emotionally dysregulated in many ways. So none of that money, as far as I can see, is heading towards schools anytime soon. So I think there's a real issue there. But what about those 2 points about we're just repeating the same old cycle of young people aren't what they used to be, and where are the resources coming from?
Well, safeguarding would be a concern for me. If you're going to have children in individual rooms, like cells with one person with them, I think there are safeguarding concerns there, not just for the student, because teachers there are very few teachers who would pose a safeguarding risk, but for the teacher's own protection as well, and it's not a comfortable way to be in school. I wouldn't want to spend, a whole day one-to-one with one particular student. I just don't think that would be a healthy environment. So I pictured what I know schools might be able to cobble together, and that's how I'm going to put it: a head teacher or a deputy head who's got sort of paperwork to catch up on for the day, being told, right, you're going to have if you can go into the room with those kids and just sit with them for the day, because that's what we're down to now in terms of staffing. That we used to have people who ran the isolation room. There was somebody employed literally to do that. She was very, very good actually, but couldn't afford her anymore. The same as the library, the same as the teaching assistants, same as all of these jobs have been taken out. When I left school, they didn't replace me. And in fact, when I left, they were hoping that it would help save a teacher their job, and then they were made redundant a year later. So those problems with staffing in schools where they're already stretched is just enormous. Not to mention room space. I mean, you're either taking up a whole enormous classroom or a small cupboard space. Just how is this going to be done? I don't see how it can be done without an expenditure. Very, very quickly, there was a school featured on the TV years ago. I think it was on one of the education type programs or something like that. They had an actual sub-school within their grounds. And students with behaviour problems went to this sub-school, and they all went, mixed year groups, everything, but they all went and they learnt the same thing. It was, I've got a feeling it was run like a bit like a primary school. We're going to do English now, we're going to do maths now. Nobody moved around, and every single child wanted to go back to the main school, and so they worked hard to do it. And when they got back, they worked hard to stay back because they didn't want that trouble again. So maybe we should be looking at more innovative ideas. That still requires extra space, but that could be an answer. And yeah, in history, throughout history, people have always bemoaned younger people, but I do feel this goes beyond that. I do feel that it goes, because actually what we're not bemoaning now is just the younger people. We're bemoaning how society, well, I suppose they would have complained and said rock and roll is the scourge of all evils. And you said the TV, people said when you were younger that TV was going to ruin young people's lives. So I guess we've always had that, but it just feels more meaningful now. They were just passing things which were meant to say we were better, and that's how people who grew up in the 30s thought we were better than the people who grew up in the 50s and things like that. I just think it's better. I think it's measurably declining.
JP, last word from you.
Yeah, I think Lucy's correct. The structure's changing, and yes, we have become the grumpy old people who are complaining about the next generation coming behind.
Speak to yourself.
Well, I do find myself that, but there is this quote, and this quote, I always use this quote myself to show you that things change, but they don't change. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in a place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers. And that's attributed to Socrates from 2,500 years.
Things were a bit rough in his day.
Well, so you're right. I mean, it's a really, really salient point, Carl. I think you're right. Every generation says things are getting progressively worse, and some things have got better. And the bulk of our children are brilliant, but it's the pattern. I think Lucy's correct also. There is a definite pattern. I think technology, the way the households are, the way that homes are, the social contract with education in schools, there is something broken at the moment, and that's what the government needs to fix, is that social contract. And I think the underfunding, the way that we've been undermined, they need to put support back in education, elevate education, and stop skirting around the edges and literally say, what's the plan for this country? What's the plan for it? Because I don't think they have a top-down version of what kind of society they want to have. And we have, because we want to turn out, well-rounded, reflective, educated young people. And we're trying our damnedest to do that. And we don't, as the comment said from Kyle, we don't suspend lightly. We don't suspend because we hate the children. I think sometimes now there's that feeling of we hate the children. Why do we hate children much? I am punishing a child sometimes. I don't want to punish them, but I feel I have to, because I have to teach them that lesson. And there's the irony, isn't it? What would the lesson be taught in internally suspending a child?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's true. And it's actually, every time a head teacher suspends a pupil, they are in fact shooting themselves in the foot, because to a degree, they're judged by statistics, and statistics can sometimes damn them. And in this case, if they suspend a lot, it could be argued that they are, not doing their job properly. So head teachers do not suspend lightly. I realise that we've got to wrap things up now, apparently. Lucy, sorry. Word to Lucy.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to talk again about our show sponsors, because I think it's really important. So this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development, books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explore the full range of titles. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. Great way to finish. Thank you very much. There's loads more we could talk about, but I think generally the opinion that we've shared today is that there are some serious concerns about this proposal. It doesn't seem to be the priority in schools at the moment, and therefore we are worried that this is a headline grabber rather than addressing the real issues. Thank you so much, everybody. That was brilliant. Okay, and I hope you enjoyed Points of View and can join us again on the show another time.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement